Hi, I'm Casey Bell, and you're watching Writer to Writer Interviews. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Writer to Writer Interviews. My name is Casey Bell, your host, and today's guest is Leslie Sussan, who shares with us her book that talks about her dad being a part of Hiroshima and later Hollywood. Let's take a look at our conversation. So give us a overview of your book. I'm assuming this is a biography?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, biography, nonfiction. It's, or memoir. It's a story of my father's, originally my father's experience in filming, taking the only color film footage in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the aftermath of the atomic bombings. He was sent by the Strategic Bombing Survey, and he had what was then an unusual credential of having studied cinematography in college. He and a crew requisitioned a train and all the color film in the Pacific Basin and spent several months starting in Nagasaki and then later in Hiroshima filming the after effects of the atomic bomb. My father was shocked at seeing people sickening and dying still months after the bombing. He didn't know anything about radiation, and he felt called to make a record of what the effects were on human beings. So he and one other photographer, second generation Japanese American, Hari Mamura, who became a great filmmaker in Japan, the two of them set out to film people in the hospitals. And the government took the film, the footage, and classified it as top secret. Oh. My father spent many years trying to get access to the footage. He never could even see the developed film that he himself had shot. And he thought that if Americans saw what the atomic bomb really did, they wouldn't have supported the continued development and deployment. He never was able to, but toward the end of his life, he connected with a Japanese group, and they were able to discover that the footage was in the National Archives, although unindexed, so no one could find it. And they bought a print of the film. They raised the money through a national grassroots campaign in Japan called the 10 Feet Campaign, asking every Japanese person to contribute enough to buy 10 feet of the almost 90,000 feet of raw footage of the aftermath of the bombings. And they used that to track down some of the people in the footage who were still alive and to make a couple of short documentaries. When my father died, he died of a cancer that he believed was related to his time in the atomic bomb cities. And his last wish was to have his ashes scattered at Ground Zero in Hiroshima. And so the memoir part comes in because I followed in his footsteps and went to Japan and lived in Hiroshima for 2 years with my daughter and came to know the survivors who remembered being filmed by my father when he was a young man. So the book is a braided story of my father's first-person account of what brought him to Hiroshima, what he saw in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and what effect it had on him. My story of following his footsteps and what I learned in Hiroshima, and the first-person accounts of many of the survivors who appear in the footage. So that's it.
That's very, I mean, when I saw the title, I originally just thought he was a part of the war and then he became a Hollywood star. I thought it was about. And so this is very shocking, but it's very intriguing, and I'm glad you wrote this. something he asked for? What was the reason for you deciding to tell this story?
You know, my father was actually part of the silent generation, they call them.
Yeah.
And they call them that for a reason. My father, like the fathers of many of my peers, didn't talk about his war experience and didn't share much, and didn't share much emotionally in general.
Mm-hmm.
When he developed the cancer, he started to speak more openly about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he spoke to some journalists. There was coverage in some magazines and on NPR. And I tried to convince him to write the story. And he kept telling me, I'm not a writer, I'm a filmmaker, I have to show images. But he did finally have a student come over to help him make, he sort of talked to her, and he said, he was making some notes for a book. And then he died, and I found the notes, and I went to Japan with the idea of spreading his ashes the way he had asked. Turns out that's illegal in Japan. I had a memorial service for him at Ground Zero, and I decided then that what I needed to spread was his words and his experience rather than his physical ashes. I came back, and I've been working on this project for 30-some years now.
Wow.
15 years into it, I discovered that the student that he had worked with had actually recorded all their sessions and had stored the recording, submitted it to Columbia University's Oral History Library, where it was sealed because my father didn't sign a release for it. So I was able to obtain it because I'm executor. So the reason there's a first-person account of my father's experience is that I only heard his first-person account after he was dead. So he didn't exactly say, go write this book, but I came to feel that in the end, it was a mission that he had passed on, and that I had a duty to him and to the survivors to make a record of what happened and the truth of the atomic bomb impact. And yeah, so that's it.
Wow. I'm like so lost now because my next questions kind of don't go along with the vibe. But I guess the one question I will ask is, I guess off the topic, because it is difficult when you find out truth and either your family or your church or your own government is not backing you, but you still feel led to share it. What advice can you give to people who have a story, such as your dad did, but are afraid to write an autobiography or a biography on the truth they know people should hear? How did you, were there fears? By any chance, were you threatened? Like, what was your process of choosing to do this?
No, I wasn't threatened, but there certainly over the years have been a lot of fears. I think my father was very afraid at different times. We have still photographs, some of which are in the book, that were produced from parts of the film. It's a 3-volume report that he did before he left the military, and he was able to take a set with him, and he would keep those and some still snapshots on the top shelf of a closet and forbid us to look at them. And he said he was afraid that if we took I wanted to take it to school, I wanted to, this. He was like, I could get in trouble. They might say I was showing obscenities to minors. I think because some of them are very gruesome and very disturbing photographs of people. And My father and I had a difficult relationship when I was growing up. I was active in the anti-war movement and in the civil rights movement. Um, I thought my father should have been out marching with us because, I didn't know much about his story, but I knew he had seen Hiroshima and Nagasaki and that he was against nuclear weapons. And, so I felt like he was a hypocrite. He felt like I was a hippie. Um, my husband, my late ex, was Black, and my father was not comfortable with my interracial relationship family. And I thought that made him a hypocrite too, because he was supposed to be a liberal and all that. So for me, as far as the personal side, I did struggle with how open to be in the book about some of these ambivalences. There were people who thought that I should be writing the book about from the point of view of just celebrating my dad as a hero who tried to bring this truth, which I think there is that aspect. But I felt that it was important to be honest about the 360-degree picture because it's a human story. It's not a story of kind of cardboard characters with good guys and bad guys. It's a story, in the end, what I want to do is ask the question of why some people look at a terrible situation and make a life-affirming choice. So why did he, as a soldier, looking at these people who had been his enemies and would have, been the force that was trying to kill him? He was under attack from kamikazes, not, a matter of weeks before. And he looked at one in particular, Namata Sensei, who's the one my whole family became close to. She was a young woman at the time and she'd lost her leg. And they brought each of these people up to the roof of the hospital to have enough light to film. And he asked her to show the stump of her leg. And when she did, she told me that he said, "Oh, that must really hurt very much." And she said, I knew from that even though he frightened me being so tall and with his big round blue eyes, that he had a kind heart. That to me is what's fascinating. There were lots of occupation forces moving through Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There were, they were picking up souvenirs and they were visiting brothels, and all of that is understandable in the aftermath of a war. People are so glad that it's over and that, they've won and all that. But it's interesting to me that someone stopped and looked at their erstwhile enemy and saw their pain.
Right.
And on the other side, the survivors whose stories I tell were looking at the people who had just destroyed everything in their world. Their bodies, their families, their homes, their futures, and saw kindness. I think that's a fascinating human story. And to understand that, you have to understand my father's not a saint and neither am I, and neither are they.
Right.
These are the depths that, of feeling that we all are capable of.
Right.
So that's the answer. I felt like I had to tell the whole truth to have the story mean what it's meant to mean.
Okay. And so tell me something about, because you said your relationship was kind of difficult during your process of producing this book, publishing this book. What were some things that changed or opened your mind about your dad that obviously you did, because he was so quiet and he didn't feel comfortable to speak? What were some things that you may go, oh, that's why he was this way, or that's why,
Oh boy, I'll tell you that's what the process, this book has taken 30 some years to write, precisely because if I had written it when I came back from Japan, I wouldn't have had any understanding really of who my father was or how he came to be the person I knew. I mean, when I knew him, when I was growing, he died at 63. So he died when I was 33. And I, knew him as mostly a frustrated, and, he'd had a fairly successful career as a television producer. But that, and he actually used a lot of his contacts in that to try to get access to the film. I mean, he talked to Edward R. Murrow, to Chet Huntley, to Walter Cronkite, to Robert Kennedy, to Harry Truman. And the answer was always the same. And, it's not of public interest. It would just be distressing footage, and, no one would have an interest in it. So he became more and more bitter and frustrated and discouraged. And he eventually, his career sort of bottomed out when I was, I guess, late high school, or toward the end of high school. So, the time when you feel like you're really knowing your parents is kind of high school, college. It was a very stilted relationship. We didn't really talk. We didn't know how to talk about what really mattered. And, I just knew I was right, which therefore meant he was wrong. And I didn't have a lot of patience to listen. The time when I had the patience to listen and the curiosity to wonder about why he felt the way he did came after he was gone. So he didn't talk, but I also didn't ask the good questions. So for me, the process of writing the book has been a revisiting of kind of my whole life and family, of reprocessing it through the lens of, I'm 67 now, I'm older than either of my parents lived to be. And I see human beings in a much more complex, nuanced light. And writing the book, I learned to direct that kind of greater wisdom toward my own parents, toward my father, toward myself as a young person, and the mistakes I was making. So I think the process to make a meaningful book for other people, you have to have first worked through your own emotional ambivalence and anger and all the feels, as my daughter says, and reached some place of compassion for everybody involved. So yeah, that's what I learned, was to start asking myself the questions I should have asked him, and then reflecting on them from what I learned from his oral history, from going through all his records, from doing a lot of research about the time period, about the war, about his life and his work in television. Just, yeah.
So with that said,
answer the question. I got carried away talking.
No, that's fine. So with that said, and this is the last question. So I know when I was in school and I was reading, history books, because in my knowledge, I wasn't connected to it, didn't care. But with that said, you said you have a daughter. You have one child or more?
I have a daughter, and then I have a stepdaughter and two grandsons. And my brother has two boys, so I have two nephews. So that's it on the next generation.
Are they aware of your dad and the impact that he had to basically world history? As far as, did they read the book? Do they understand, the story?
It's funny you say that. My daughter was with me through all of this. So yes, she did. And she has read a couple of versions of the manuscript and did a final sort of sensitivity read of the final draft for me. And she appears in the book, talking some about you know, what she did and didn't understand as a young child in Hiroshima. So I feel like she's, you know, fully understands. But my nephew is reading the book now, and he sent me an email. He's actually hopefully going to do, he says he's going to make me a video trailer for the book because he's a film and video editor, so kind of followed in my father's footsteps. And he sent me an email actually last night saying that while there were facts in here that he knew about, that this has just been eye-opening for him, that he's, you know, really had no full understanding of the sort of the meaning of all this in history, and also that he's coming to understand himself in new ways and see how this is part of his heritage. So that's been, yeah, kind of exciting to hear. One of the things I really wanted to do with this book, there are other books about, you know, why was the bomb dropped, or that it wasn't necessary, or, you know, physically what were the destruction that was involved. But I really felt like the unique thing here is that it's told from a very human level. It's, you know, one American guy stumbling into this mess,
right,
and trying to grasp it. And I'm hoping that for people who react, as you say, most of us do, to history as like it's got nothing to do with me. And, you know, it's just sort of some abstract thing that happened 75 years ago.
right.
That because of that human scale, that at least, you know, perhaps some Americans that otherwise reject debates about Hiroshima and nuclear weapons will be able to find this approachable enough to come to more of an understanding.
Wow, I don't even feel like I can follow that. I mean, definitely, I didn't judge the book by the cover, but I did judge the book by the title. And I think that's amazing that you found the strength to do that, because not just in America, but in the world, where we feel more comfortable keeping secrets, not realizing that, okay, you may die and everything's fine, but maybe 50, 60 years down the line, that secret you kept is causing people problems that you didn't even realize would cause problems. And so I'm glad that you wrote this book and that you chose to share your dad's story. I just think
Thank you. That's really sweet of you. I do think that's right. It's the stuff that gets buried that you know, ferments and explodes.
Exactly.
You know, it needs to be lanced. It needs to be, it's like racism.
Yeah.
You keep denying it and burying it, you don't fix it.
Yeah, it just keeps coming back and forth. Even when you think it's gone, or you pretend it's gone, it'll just keep coming back. And so.
Yeah, it's what, you know, I used to have friends that would say, I prefer white, you know, bigots who will just say so to white liberals who deny, you know, who say they're colorblind, because, you know, if you can't even say it's there, you certainly can't do anything about it.
Right, right.
I'm sure people say the same thing now, although those are the words from the 70s. It's the same problem.
I mean,
heartbreaking.
I don't know if it's pure denial or if it's lack of experience. Because, like, for me, I would never say anything against, kind of off the subject, a woman going through her period, because I never experienced it. But I'm not going to also deny it just because I haven't experienced it. It's obviously, you know, a thing. And I know, because I was watching The View, and Whoopi Goldberg has this CBD oil business, because she said some women go through pains worse than other. And she said she's had women say, oh, that can't be because I haven't experienced it. And it's like, unfortunately, we have that mindset that if I haven't seen it, smelt it, touched it, it's not true, instead of stopping to say, let me hear someone else's story, because it very well could be true. Just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it's not a thing.
Yeah, that's true.
I hope people, and I hope they, I don't know, whatever government, people learned their lesson and choose not to continue that type of warfare, because you know?
Well, the scary thing is that actually they're currently trying to eliminate the restrictions on testing nuclear weapons and want to renovate and expand the arsenal. Actually, the Bulletin for the Bulletin for Atomic Scientists. You know, have you heard of the Doomsday Clock?
Sounds familiar.
They ever since World War II, the Bulletin for Atomic Scientists has estimated how far we are from midnight, where midnight is the end of civilization as we know it.
Okay.
And we were 7 minutes away in 1947. We're now 100 seconds away.
Okay.
It's the closest we've been to midnight ever. So the danger has not gotten better. It's gotten horrifically worse, which is why I still feel like it's important to tell.
Talk about it. Yeah.
You know, yeah, I mean, if it were purely historical, I still probably would have felt I should make a record and put it in the, library or something by way of history. But it's not just history. It's now a threat that's greater than it was the day after they dropped the bomb on Hiroshima.
Right. Well, I'm hoping, if not teachers, students are brave enough to bring your book. Well, for those who go to school, I don't know how many schools are being open this year, but bring it to the school, because if you're going to learn about it, you might as well learn it from someone who's, experienced it, as opposed to just the historian who wrote about it. Because most history books are just written by historians, not people who experienced it.
I hope so. I need to learn how to reach out to teachers and schools, because I think it would be appropriate for high schools. A couple of nuclear history professors at universities have said they would like to use it with their students, but I feel like it would, and I'm looking forward to that, but I feel like it would be good for high school students. There's nothing in it that's, that they couldn't handle. I mean, it's disturbing, but it's not, considering what kids read now, I don't think there's anything in it that's, so gruesome or whatever that they couldn't learn from it.
The video
I do feel like it's human scale, so maybe they can relate.
Yeah, well, especially in the state you're living in, like I said, when you're in school and you don't know anyone, but for them to say, okay, someone who once lived in this state where I'm living experienced that, it may connect to them better, and their ears will be more open to hear than be mentally sleeping during the class.
Yeah, that's true.
Hey, are you a writer, a songwriter, a playwright, screenwriter, author? You write articles, poetry. If you're a writer, I want to sit down and talk with you. Go to my website, authorkcbell.com, and click on Writer to Writer Interviews for more information. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this message. Choosing Life, My Father's Journey in Film from Hollywood to Hiroshima by Leslie Sussan recounts Second Lieutenant Herbert Sussan experiences filming the aftermath of the bombings in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The book inspired me to a commitment to work for peace and tolerance of all humans. Timeless perspective and a timely reminder as atomic survivors dwindle. An honest and kind personal history driven by the horror of nuclear war. Go to Hiroshima-choosinglife.com today for more information and to order your copy. And we are back. Let's get back into the conversation.
So I noticed that your book talked about identifying factors that make you unique. And I wondered, it seems to me most people share a lot of things. I mean, we actually have a lot in common as human beings, and more so, I think, than differences. So I wondered about that. What do you mean by being unique, and what sort of factors make a person unique?
Well, there's actually well, as of now, there's 5 factors I know for sure that makes everyone unique, including identical twins. I won't go into detail, but I'll just name them. The first one, fingerprints.
Oh,
If you, and I only know this because I used to be a detective show addict. I couldn't get enough of it. There was this one episode, and you didn't find out towards the end, but there was these triplets. At first you thought it was just one person, then you found out she was a twin, then you found out she was a triplet. And I don't remember what they did, but they did something together. It was great. They couldn't figure out which one did it because they couldn't figure out the the alibi, and this one was here. And then someone dropped blood, but identical twins share the same DNA, so they couldn't figure it out. Get down to the last bit of it, one of them left a fingerprint. And that's how they couldn't tie the other 2 in, but they were like, well, we got you, so you could either go in by yourself or you can turn your sisters in. And that's how they were able to figure out who did what, because
so the fingerprints are different in identical twins. I didn't know that. And I was a prosecutor and I didn't know that.
So that was one thing that helped them find out who whatever. And so that's the first thing is your fingerprint. The second thing are the feet print. Those are unique. And all feet print as well. I probably shouldn't say this, but if you're about to commit a crime, don't be barefoot because they can prove you were there, And then your ear print, believe it or not, is completely unique. And again, if you're about to commit a crime, cover your ears because if you lean and I saw an episode of that. I was watching a show out of, I think, England on Amazon Prime. They went to the scene of the crime and there was an ear print and they were able to find out that person didn't do it, but they were able to prove that they were there. And so your ear print is unique as well. And then your, what's the other one? Your mouth is unique. Not only are your teeth unique, so if you die, they can get your dental records to prove it's you, but your lip has its own unique print and so does your tongue. So again, if you're about to commit a crime, don't drink anything, don't kiss anything, because they can prove you were the one who was there. And then the last thing is your iris. The iris in your eye.
Yeah, they use that, I know, for biometrics.
They now have, what do you call it, doors that unlock or whatever, that stuff. So, but in the book, I break down why those things are unique and how they're important to your life and how they guide you through your successes, and that most people don't understand. Like when you come up with an idea and you accidentally share it with someone, usually you see something, like not physically, but you have a visual of an idea, but because your irises are unique, no one else can see it. So if you share it with the wrong person, they'll sometimes, oh, that's a dumb idea. Oh, don't do that. Because they can't, even though you can see the vision, because your irises are unique and their irises don't match yours, they can't actually see it. So if you share it with the wrong person, then you'll end up not doing something that can make you successful simply because, oh, women don't do that, or, oh, Jews don't do that, and so you use that instead of your uniqueness to say, well, yes, women may not have done that, but because this is the vision for me, I'm not going to allow my gender or my height or weight or whatever else stop me from doing something because it's not what everyone else is doing, so to speak. And so those are the 5 factors that I mentioned in the book and how they work with you if you allow them to.
So what made you decide to write the book?
I actually had no intentions of writing it. I had taught this in church and someone said, oh, you should put that in a book. And at the time, I couldn't see it as a book because I was demonstrating things. And in my mind, originally, when I came up with this idea, I thought it was only a workshop type of deal. I didn't see it as a book. But someone said you should put it in a book. And it seemed like every day after that, I kept thinking about it you should put it in a book. You should put it in a book. And then I finally said, well, then how can I put it in a book where I'm not losing the information because we're not demonstrating, we're not up demonstrating. But I will say, whether I do this as a class or whether you read it as a book, you're not, how do I say, it's different. So you may see more in a workshop than you will see reading or vice versa.
So I wondered when I saw, it's pretty short, I wondered if it was a tool that you were planning to use. And so that kind of makes sense to me, that there are workshops that go with this. Are there other, how do you see this book being used going forward?
I actually started I did a webinar. It was a 4-day webinar because there's 4 keys. So I did a key for each webinar. I showed up even though no one else showed up. And I did the webinar only because I wanted to learn how to do one, as far as the computer and how to. And so I plan on continuing to do more webinars and keep doing it to practice, whether people show up or not. And then, of course, once it's okay, to do it as workshops outside of the internet. But the book is, how do I say, it assists the workshop. So you can go through the workshop and then get the book and then get a clearer understanding and hopefully a want to use the information to go forth. Because lots of times we gain information and then we sit. We don't actually move with it. So.
Well, that goes to my other question, which was, what is it you're hoping that people will actually gain from reading the book or working with it?
Mostly self-acceptance. Because even now, not just with the whole black-white thing, but with everything, sometimes men argue with one another, compete against one another. Sometimes women have the competitive thing. Sometimes different people of different ethnicities. And because they think that, well, because you look like me, you got to be like me. And if you're not, either there's something wrong with me or there's something wrong with you. And now we have to debate and figure out who's right or wrong. And the purpose of it is for people to accept that, yes, you may be a white bird as a swan, but that doesn't mean you have to try to be like a dove, if that makes sense. Because they're both white birds, but they're not trying in any way, shape, or form to be like one another. And they're also not degrading one another because they're different. And they're also not trying to be like the other. They've accepted themselves and they accepted the other. And so my hope is for people to not only accept themselves and their uniqueness, but accept other people. And it doesn't mean you have to like, I don't know, country music, but it also doesn't mean you have to talk bad about them just because you don't like it. Because you don't like it, that doesn't mean you now have to degrade them and, criticize. And it's one of the things, like on YouTube, when you'll see like 5,000 dislikes, it's like, you don't have to share that. You don't have to share. Like on YouTube, they show you who liked the video and who disliked it.
Oh,
yeah. And the thing is, you don't have to share that you disliked it. You could just move on, but we have that or they leave comments showing you they disliked it. And the question is, but you didn't need to. You could have just realized it wasn't for your entertainment, which is fine because there's more people in the world other than you. And you can just make up in your mind you disliked it and move forward. But we have the habit of trying to not necessarily share a dislike to share it, but share a dislike hopefully that they would change so that we can like it. You know what I mean? And that's what most criticism is. It's not, I think you're bad. It's, I think you're bad and you need to change so I can like you. And so I'm hoping this causes people to just accept yourself and not have to try to change and not have to ask someone else to change as well.
Sort of reminds me of something in our Quaker meetings. We have an expression that speaks to my condition. So if, I don't know if you know Quaker meetings, but we don't have a minister. We have silent meetings, and anyone who feels called to speak can rise and speak the message that they're given. So that's kind of the way it works. And, sometimes people say something that makes no sense to you at all, and other times someone says something that's very moving.
Right.
And one of the ways we deal with it is just, if something doesn't speak to my condition, I just let it go, because it might make no sense to me, but the person for whom the message is intended by God will know what it's about. Right. So it isn't my problem. So it kind of reminds me of that when it comes. I don't care for country music, but I'm sure there are people for whom it's been a lifeline.
Right. And it's,
Yeah. So I like that you said. So I guess the last question I had was where did you plan to go from here? Are you planning to write more books or do more, go more into this workshop approach or?
Well, right now I am focused on this writer interviews and my YouTube channel. I have another show for artists, and I also have another show that I'm doing discussing veganism. And
really?
It takes a lot of work. And I am multitasking as far as I'm now just starting to submit my work to journals and magazines. I've always heard about it, but my thing was most of them want unpublished work. And I'm always like, oh, my work is already published, and I'm not trying to write something new just for a magazine or a journal. But what I have been doing is repurposing. Because I have a lot of works. I have a lot of films, actually, short films that I've written.
Oh, wow.
And of course, I would say they're great. And I said, well, instead of just waiting for me to find a way to get them produced, why not turn them into short stories and submit them? Because the message behind them is still great and everyone needs to hear it. So I've been repurposing my work. I have a lot of songs that are sitting around doing nothing. So I repurposed them into poems and submitting them as poems. And so that's what I'm actually working on now. I do have more books in mind, but I don't want to really. Books for me take a lot of work, and it's. Hey,
you're talking to someone who spent 30 years to get one book done. So
like, I don't want to multitask with a book. Mm-hmm. When it comes to writing a book, I want that to be the only thing I'm doing, because it really takes a lot out of me, and I can't. For me, mentally, it's not. I can't do both and both be well. If that makes sense. If I write a book and try to do something else, the book is not. And the thing is, I won't even want to publish it because I already know it's not going to be as good as it could have been had I just focused on that alone. Mm. So I'm going to wait till some of this stuff is out off my plate, and then I'll sit down and write those ideas that I had. Well, that is all the time we have for you today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching.
Well, I'm glad you're doing this. How many interviews have you done? Is this the first, or how many are you doing for this writer to writer?
You are I think 9.
9. Oh, so yeah, you've done it. So how are you gonna, what are you going to do with this recording now that you have it? Are you putting these out as episodes or editing bits out of them, or how does it work?
They end up being kind of like a television program. There's an introduction. Okay. Yeah, there's an introduction, and then the first interview, and then the book reel or commercial, so to speak, the author's book reel, and then we go back to the second section, and then I add my book reel, or if I feel like it just doesn't fit, I just end the show. So it kind of looks like a talk show, somewhat interview talk show, but that's what I've been doing.
Well, yeah, I don't have a book reel until my nephew finishes the book. So, but that's he says he'll make me a trailer, which I guess is like a book reel.
Yeah, I'm sure he can do a much better job than me, but whoever doesn't have one, I make one. It's what I can do.
Oh, you can make one. Oh, okay.
Not as good.
No,
I use what I use.
Great.
But yes.
Considering I have nothing. I mean, it'll be great if he does something, but something that'll be great in the future is nothing today.
Right. But
Yeah,
that's,
unfortunately, I am the opposite. I mean, apparently this video thinking skipped the generation down to my nephew, because I am 100% about words and not at all about visuals.
but I think that worked out right. It really
I
did.
guess so.
And I'm hoping maybe one day your nephew will do a documentary
That
on
would be
this
great. Yeah.
and, produce it and release it.
Yeah. I think, if he does the trailer for me, it'll help reach like the younger demographic that I would like to introduce this to, that don't know as much. Because he did the ads for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, very jumping and, not boomer generation. I mean, clearly it all was too fast and too loud and too many things happening. So it was perfect for its audience. So hopefully he'll be able to do something like that for me, because I would not, wouldn't reach the right people. Well, it was great talking to you. I wish you the best luck with your work.
Thank you. You too.
Thank
Yeah, this was amazing. I'm very happy I got to learn about that your book and your
Thank you.
father, and I wish you well, and I truly hope your nephew finishes that book quickly, and I hope it really does encourage him, because it doesn't have to go to, well, nowadays no one's going to the movie theater, but he can definitely research. What I'll do is I will email you a link. They've made it easier now to submit films to film festivals. There's like one website where you can, it's very amazing. Basically, you put in all your information for the film, and then it's in your account. And then when you're going to submit, you just put this film, and it's automatically in there. And of course, there's a fee. So depending on how much money he has, he can keep submitting to every film festival that is, how do I say, appropriate. Because you don't want to like do a comedy film festival, because it's not,
Right. Yeah,
So,
I'll see if he's interested. The guy who wrote the foreword to my book, who actually was a journalist that wrote about my father, he's the first journalist that wrote about my father in the 1980s. He's got a documentary that he's put together this year that's about the suppression, the U.S. government's suppression of films and suppression of information about the atomic bombings. So it features the story of my father's crew and their films, but it's also includes, the U.S. government seized the black and white footage that was shot by Japanese photographers and filmmakers. And yeah, so I mean, it wasn't just that they classified their own stuff and wouldn't allow anyone to see it. They seized everything they could get their hands on, and they imposed a press code in Japan throughout the occupation, which lasted until 1952. So, that's a good 5 years in which you could not publish a single word or image relating to the atomic bombing. So his documentary kind of goes on that line, but I really like it. And he said he was going to submit it to film festivals, but I haven't seen anything yet about it coming out. So I hope he's using this, but I'd still wish it would be really nice if my nephew would consider doing something from the more, I think of Greg Mitchell's articles and his film are more polemics. They're arguments about, what was done and why it was wrong. I'm good at arguing. It's my profession. I'm an attorney and a judge, but that's not what I do in this book. It's not an argument.
right.
I mean, I hope that the cumulative effect of getting to know these people is that people, who are reading it have some emotional responses and think through a lot of things from a different perspective than they might have brought to the book. but it's not framed as an argument to sort of be over the head with it.
Right.
So I'd love to see my nephew do something that's more from that approach, and that maybe goes toward younger people.
Right.
So that's cool. Yeah, I would love to know more about that.
Well, I'm going to say this. When the film is ready, let me know. I'm just going to speak it forth. And when you hear about any, because when you submit to a film festival, it may be rejected. So you just got to wait to hear. So once you hear something, just let me know.
Okay.
So I can support, because this is very important.